Hello, everybody. This is Gabrielle and Charice with In Session Podcast, and we are back. We are here for another episode, which is my favorite time of the week. So, Charice, what are we talking about?
Welcome back. Today, I cannot talk today. Today we are talking about the top most Googled mental health questions. And so we just have a couple of questions that we are going to look over today and try to give you some tips and things to try when it comes to these questions. And so the first question that was Googled the most, and this is from CNN. And so they just did a Google search and they got the data. And the top one was how to handle stress. And so when we think about stress, I think it's this idea that there's pressure, that there's expectations, and maybe there's things that are out of our control that we're not able to handle or we're not sure how to go about. And I think that's what creates some stress. And so when you hear that question, Gabrielle, what do you think about some ways to handle it?
Yeah. Well, first, I think it's interesting that was the number one top Googled question about mental health, because stress is so consistent in just about everybody's life. Nobody's really exempt from it. And so when I hear someone saying, hey, how do I handle stress? My first tidbit is always accept that stress does exist and will likely continue to exist. And so our goal is not to live a life absent of stress, but live a life in a way that my stress is managed. And so when stressful situations arise, I have the tools or I have the knowledge to deal or manage with that. Because I think sometimes people will automatically assume if I have stress, then it's bad. But you really can't avoid stress, you know?
Yeah, I was telling clients this all last week that happiness and joy is not the absence of stress or absence of hard emotions. It's being able to feel that full range of emotions. And I know we've talked about that before on the podcast, just experiencing your emotions fully. And so stress is one of those things that you have to experience. And I think when it comes to stress and handling it, for me personally, it's looking at those things that are out of my control and almost having to accept that. Sometimes it's really hard. I struggle with that too, but then it's looking at the in control and doing those things and seeing how those things make me feel better. No, it does not take the stressful thing away all the time, but it helps me manage what am I going to do to function, to still get by through the day, doing the things that are in my control. Absolutely. What do you think about that?
I love that. And I think even when you're identifying what can I control and what can I not, it can be really helpful when you identify what I can control. Create a very simple, what do I need to do immediately? Because a lot of times we're overwhelmed with there's so much to do, or maybe the stress is causing me to spiral and I'm noticing all these things that aren't right or that aren't working. And that can feel like too much at the time. So what you want to do is, what's my immediate need? And let's start off with just one. Okay, I've met that first immediate need. Do I have another need that I need to address? And so really slowing down in the midst of stress and not allowing the stress to cause you to race, because a lot of times we get stressed and we start to go into overdrive and I'm rushing to handle this problem and that problem. And you really need to slow down and take it one need at a time. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think when it maybe gets to this point of Googling how to handle stress, there's like a million different fires and there's a lot of different stress. And so we don't know which direction to go. And so I do like almost triaging and assessing what is that immediate need that I can meet. But then also I think a way to handle stress is kind of more preventative. Like we talk about therapy, is thinking about it on a thermometer. And so from a 0 to 10, if 10 is the most stressed ever and 0 is not stressed at all, if you're at a 0, how can you continue to monitor that so that when you get to a 3 or 4, we're doing things there so it doesn't get to that 10. And so a 3 or 4 might look like I have a few things that are stressful, but I'm still functioning pretty well. Yeah. And it can make us feel like we don't need to do anything to prevent or to look at what's going on. But really at a 3 or 4 is when we're thinking most logically, when we can probably do more things to make sure we have our self-care in place, that we're able to, socialize with people, we're doing our routines, and that helps it get from that 10. Not saying that it won't ever get to that 10, but that it'll go more slowly, and that if it does increase, you'll be more resilient to be able to handle it because you did have your routines and functioning in place.
That is so important, because most of us will wait until we're not just like, oh, I'm dealing with stress, I'm stressed out. And there's a very big difference, because if I can catch it early when, oh, this is a stressful circumstance, or this could be stress inducing, etc. When we catch it in the earlier stage and we are at that 3 or 4, like Charice is talking about, not only do we have more logical capacity to deal with it and emotional bandwidth, but then we can also recruit help if it does become something that I can't manage on my own. Right. But if I wait until it gets a 10, I may not identify who I could go to for help. It may be beyond at that point what someone can fix in the moment, which doesn't make us feel good. And so a lot of it is being aware on the front end. And I know we're kind of used to being stressed. We're used to having so much on our plate, but let's not allow our threshold to be so high all the time to where the only time we identify that stress is present is if I'm completely stressed out and I am like spiraling. Let's try to notice even small things about, am I under a stress of any kind? And that could be maybe your eye is twitching or or maybe like, does my body feel more tense, or are there changes in my appetite, or is my sleep a little bit off? Try to pay attention to the smaller things before it gets too bad.
Yeah, I love looking at your plate because I think there's those physical symptoms that show your body is under stress, but it feels like because our plate is managed and we're holding all the things on the plate that we're doing fine, when really we could probably function with less things on that plate because we don't always recognize how much is actually on our plate. And so I can't tell you how many times I've had in therapy asking clients, how much is on your plate right now? And they're just giving a whole bunch of things that they don't recognize. And then it gets to the point where they're so committed to these things that they don't know which one to stop or which one that they can take off their plate. And so I will recommend looking at your plate. Even if you can't take anything off, make sure that you're not adding anything that's going to bring more commitment, or you're adding things that let you feel less stress, like self-care or just taking care of yourself by doing activities that you like, hanging out with friends, talking to family, going to see a therapist, things like that that can be beneficial that you do add to your plate. I think being really intentional about what you choose is really important too.
Absolutely, absolutely. And so what would you want to say as we kind of wrap up this first top Googled mental health question with stress? Do you have any recommendations for people if they're wanting to get help with their stress, or even like how you manage it personally?
Stress is normal. And so I think just normalizing that this is something that's going to happen forever. But then also recognizing where your stress comes from. And so for me personally, I'm a big person that likes to have everything in control. And so if things aren't organized, that's my anxiety literally goes to things that are not organized. And if I can't do that, I start to spiral. And so I think recognizing for you personally what happens when you notice stress coming up and why it's functioning, like why it's there. And then you can tangibly pick interventions and things that you can do that'll be helpful. So for me, like I said, I like to look at those things that are in my control and focus on that and almost go towards acceptance of the things that I can't. But for you, stress may manifest differently. It may look differently. And so that's really important to figure out where it's coming from. And if you're struggling with that, I would say go to a professional, get help, because they can see, this is what's happening. This is the pattern. This is where I can see you, flourishing if you get help. So I think, recognizing it and then getting help if you need.
I love that. I love that. Our next top Googled mental health question is how to stop a panic attack. And this was interesting because, well, one, it's really specific, but then two, I'm like, how to stop it. So, okay, maybe it's already started. I don't know. So if that is the case, I think we did an episode. Okay, we did an episode on panic already. So please go back and listen to that if you want more detail here. But when I read the question, how to stop a panic attack, I think number one would be, am I actually having a panic attack in the moment, or is this something that I'm doing preventatively? Because that changes how we address it in the moment. If I am actively having a panic attack, it could be really helpful if you're listening to this now. Think about those situations or environments when typically you start to panic, and try to have like a mental recollection of what's my plan of action if I start to have a panic attack. And so if you're often by yourself when you're having panic attacks, make a voice note on your phone. And even if you are panicking and you start to feel that come on, you can pull up your phone, play that voice note, and I'll have my clients like voice record a meditation or voice record, them grounding themselves. There's a grounding activity where you can do like, 5 things that I see, 4 things that I'm, smelling, etc. But they can play it back in that moment if they don't have someone to help them through that, and it kind of calms their system. If you have a person that you're around when you're having those panic attacks, them being aware of how to help you could be really great. And it could look like helping you get to a cold surface. It could be, helping you breathe, whether that's the 4-square breathing method, something like that. But it just depends on if you're alone or with somebody. What would you say?
Yeah. When I saw this question, I thought it was interesting too, because I immediately thought, are people Googling this because they're in a panic attack right now, which means that they're needing immediate help. And it does feel like that. It feels like this is urgent. I need help. But I do like the preventative strategies of making sure that you have a voice note or a list, because when you are that flooded, it makes you feel like you don't know what to do. And so you can be floundering, and you just know that you want that feeling to stop, because your body is often in high alert. It's alarming you to something is wrong, and it's hard to think. It's hard to think logically, and so having those things with you can be really helpful. I like mindfulness. I know on the episode that we did, I talked a lot about grounding, and so using that 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 method, making sure that you orient yourself to your surroundings, and almost reframing your thoughts if you can. So I think a big thing with panic is that I'm dying, or I'm going insane, or I don't know what's happening. It may feel like that, but physically, you're okay.
Yeah.
Mentally, your brain is going on high alert because your body is responding, but physically you are okay. And so if you can reframe your thoughts to say, okay, right now, I I am in a safe environment. I'm okay. This is going to pass. It feels like it lasts for a lifetime, but it really is only usually a couple of minutes. And so reframing those thoughts to make sure that your body is believing that you are safe.
Yeah, and something that I would say is, if you're listening to this, hopefully you're not having a panic attack right now. And if that is the case, but, panic attacks are something that you deal with, I would become really familiar with what typically sets you off that causes you to panic or have those attacks, because we can start to do some things or some work around that. If you deal with panic attacks, getting a professional to assist you with helping manage those triggers is really, really essential. But even outside of that, hey, is it when I'm leaving work? Is it when I have a difficult conversation with a family member, or, something identifiable like that? And you could actually do some coping skills prior to that situation or that environment, which would hopefully either completely dissolve a panic attack from forming, or it could lessen it in the moment. So hopefully you're listening to this and you're not currently panicking, and you can start to think through, okay, when was the last time I had a panic attack? Could I do something beforehand, like Charice mentioned, to ground myself or to keep myself oriented that would prevent this from happening maybe? So those are another kind of tips to help with that.
I love that. I think associating panic with the right cues is so important, because I hear all the time that clients will say, I had a panic attack in this area or in this situation, and so they avoid that situation, or they associate, if I go here, it's going to happen. And sometimes panic attacks are really random, and so no, it doesn't have to be that association, but there could be some cues that make you feel more anxiety that can lead to a panic attack. And so maybe it wasn't the situation in general, but maybe it's how you felt in that situation, or if something unique happened in that situation. We can associate that with anxiety, and anxiety can be associated with what's happening in your body, and then that leads to the panic. And so I think there's this cycle of panic that happens, and associating that with the right thing can be really helpful. So when you're in the environment, or when something happens, you know that this is a trigger, this is a potential thing that I need to take care of in the moment, so that you are able to cope better if panic does occur, or even just to prevent it in general.
Absolutely. And so what I would really recommend, if this was one of the questions that really resonated with you, do some of these things that we're talking about. Identify what coping skills help you before, during, or after. Kind of have that plan, whether that is that 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 method, if there's voice notes that you like, meditation, etc. Be really proactive about having those things in place. And then also learn to identify what cues do I need to pay attention to. And again, it's not that this environment is bad, like that restaurant or that car or whatever the case is, but did something, elevate my anxiety? Did it elevate me, physically to a point where my body reacted, trying to keep me calm or trying to save me when there really was no danger? So I would kind of recommend that.
Yeah. Our next question is how to cure depression.
Ooh.
I think these questions are just really interesting altogether, because they center on anxiety and depression, which I think are the most common mental health diagnoses in the country. Yeah. And so when I hear this question, I think the word cure is very specific. And when I'm reading these questions, it's like, wow, there's one word in each one that's like, it makes it stand out. Yeah. And so when you hear the word cure, what do you think about?
Here's the thing. You really can't cure depression, right? And so you hear us talk a lot about managing. The reason why we use the word manage is because, just like we said, stress was kind of ever present and things like that. Depression isn't something like, oh, I get it, and like I take this pill and it goes away. You have to manage it, because likely there's a lot of chemistry and biology behind it. But even just on a layman's term level, if something has happened in my life or I'm dealing with symptoms of depression, there's no quick fix. There's no one thing that, ooh, do this, Gabrielle, and then it's cured, right? There's things we have to do to manage those symptoms, to improve those symptoms, and then simultaneously improve your quality of life. And so when I think about mental health, it's never a goal of, ooh, I want to cure this person from anxiety or cure them from depression, but I want to improve their quality of life. I want to lessen their symptoms. I want to increase their ability to cope. It's things like that. And I actually think that's a really good distinction, though, because some people get almost defeated when they feel like, why do I keep dealing with this? Or why do I have to proactively manage this always? Why can't it just go away? And they start to have unrealistic expectations for what mental health is, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. When I heard this question, I immediately thought, just as professionals, we know that if you have one depressive episode, you're most likely to have another one. Yeah. And so I feel like it is any mental health diagnosis can be a lifelong thing that you manage, but people may not have that awareness. And so they do come in thinking, is there a cure? Yeah. Is there a way that I can get over this? Because I hear that a lot of, why can't I just get past this? I should be better now because I've been in therapy, I've been taking medicine. But it is something that you manage. And I think when clients begin to embrace that, they live a life, like we said, for ADHD in a way that works for them, managing their mental health in the best way that they know how. And they still have a very, enjoyable life. It just might look different because we are having to be more intentional about what we do and the things that we pay attention to. And I don't think that's a negative thing. Right. I think we all have not a mental health diagnosis, but we have mental health struggles. Yeah. We experience different emotions. We experience different things. And that, if we avoid that and we ignore that, we are more likely to have bigger mental health issues or bigger problems because we are not resolving anything within us or around us.
Absolutely. And I think when you have that as the forefront of you kind of getting help or you working on yourself, I think there's a lot of power that can come from knowing, hey, this is something that I can execute control over by managing it. And when I take the expectation away that I have to cure it and I have to get rid of it entirely, which is impossible, when you take it and instead say, no, I'm going to manage it. I'm going to have an amazing life. I'm going to be proactive about my mental health. I'm going to, eat a healthy, nutritious diet. I'm going to go to therapy regularly. I'm going to set good boundaries, all those things. It puts you in the power position to where your mental health challenge, diagnosis, etc., doesn't have to define you. And so when I hear people say like, oh, I want to cure it, I think a lot of times people don't want that label associated with them. And they think that, oh, if I have this, then this defines who I am. And by now, you probably know on this podcast, we don't believe that. We don't think you have to be defined by any struggle, by any diagnosis or challenge. It depends on how you want to relate to that issue. So if you're dealing with depression, let's take off the expectation to cure it and say, how can I manage it? How can I have power over it so that it doesn't have power over me? Because that is possible.
Yep. Huge. Your perception of any mental health diagnosis or condition that you have is going to be a great catalyst for change. And so if we view it in a way that we can have power over it, I think that very much helps us create new behaviors and feel a different way towards it and towards ourselves. And so we're not stigmatized by saying, oh, depression looks like this and I feel this way and I am lazy and et cetera, all the things that you hear sometimes when it comes to depression. You no longer have that. You have the healthy thought that this is something that I'm managing, I'm doing my best, and I still have an enjoyable life. And that directly leads to what behaviors you're doing. And so if you don't feel like you have that power, I think it's almost self-defeating. And so it does feel like I don't know what to do and I just have this thing. It's almost like we tie our hands and we give the power over to depression and we let depression run and we don't have to do that. So of course I like to think about thoughts and how that influences your behavior. I think that first step is definitely having a healthy perspective. And then when it comes to the behaviors, doing things that manage the depression, not even like lifting the depression away, but managing it. And so making sure that you are taking your medicine, making sure that you are still going through your routines. I hear that a lot, is that it takes a lot of mental energy to continue to do your routines when you have depression. And so maybe it's modifying it. Maybe you brush your hair instead of, washing your hair. You do small things like that. So where you're still functioning and to where the depression is not, taking control over everything that you do, because I know it does take a lot of mental energy, but we still have to function. We still have to do the things that we're responsible for. And so that could be a way that you attack it, is by creating those smaller scale steps in your routine that make it more manageable for you.
Absolutely. And I think with anything, even health related or mental health related specifically, consistency is key, because if I'm consistently prioritizing my mental health and I am managing my my challenge, be that anxiety, depression, ADHD, what have you, if I'm consistent with those routines and those things that help my life be functionable and help me continue to operate optimally, if I'm consistent with that, there's more probability that I'm in control as opposed to my diagnosis. But when we aren't consistent, that's when we notice, like, man, depression is really kicking my butt this month, or man, ADHD, anxiety, what have you, is really running its way. It's probably because, hey, was I consistent with those things that was helping me manage and helping me operate optimally? So I would just really challenge anybody dealing with that. Be consistent. Find what works for you, because it's different for every person. Be consistent with it. And then maybe that I want to cure it becomes I'm in control of it and I'm managing it. And it may not affect your life as significantly as you may think it might.
Absolutely. And our final question is best mental health practices for children. So what do you hear when you think about that question?
Well, I like it. One, I like it because, yes, children have mental health and we should certainly engage with that and prioritize it. And I really like, for children, helping them just understand what emotions are. I think that's always a really good starting place, because first of all, they're children. And so developmentally, there's just a lot going on. And so children aren't, and I guess it depends on the age of the child we're talking about, but if we're going to just speak generally, children may not come into therapy and be like, hey, Miss Charice, I'm feeling depressed and this is going on, right? They may not have the language. And so I think one of the best things we can do for our children is normalize conversations around mental health and help them on a child, or developmentally appropriate level, understand what mental health is. And so understanding what emotions are, understanding, how do I talk to a friend who hurt my feelings? How do I deal with my anger, my frustration when mom told me to give my tablet up or something like that? But taking really practical, child-friendly things and helping them learn how to engage healthily. Does that make sense?
It does. When I saw this question, I Googled. I was like, what would Google say about the best practices? And it gave a lot of good things like mindfulness, emotional regulation, talking about it. And I think what you're leaning towards is parents modeling what you want your kids to see. And I think that's so underrated. So I really think the best mental health practice is you as a parent or you as an adult figure showing them what you want them to view about their mental health, showing them how you want them to interact with their mental health. And so if they're frustrated, how you handle your frustration is going to show them this is a way that I could do that. And if it's healthy, that's great. But if you handle it in an unhealthy way, they're most likely going to understand this is how I view frustration and this is what I can do when I'm frustrated. And so if you as a parent or caregiver are aware of your own mental health and have good conversations with them, or just model how you take care of your mental health, I think that shows them, okay, this is how I view it and this is how I feel about mental health. It's less stigmatized and they can feel supported and they can feel like they have agency in their own decisions when it comes to their emotions and ways that they want to interact with their mental health.
Yeah. And I think leading into that modeling, it's really important that your language expands your children's vocabulary of what emotions are, because a lot of us, so many times, we're used to saying like, oh, I'm fine, or everything's good. And when you start to ask your child that, like, oh, how was your day? It was fine. It was okay. And we just leave it there, over time, that becomes the default setting where it's like, oh, I'm good. I'm fine. Everything's okay. And then when, later on in life, when things aren't okay, things aren't fine, if their default setting has been programmed to only say those 1 to 3 words, you're likely not going to get really good information to help your child through whatever challenge. And so normalize saying things like, oh, I'm feeling sad, or, oh, I had a hard day. I'm really tired, or, oh, I'm so excited. This really great thing happened. Just normalize giving a little bit more detail, even with kids, because when you want them to be teenagers and you want them to talk to you, if the default in the home has always been, I'm good, fine, okay, well, when they tell you that, what did you think was going to happen? You have to kind of give them more vocabulary to explain it. And so I'm a language-based, I guess, therapist, because narrative, here we go. But I love just talking about different emotions, talking about different experiences, and you don't have to shy away from hard moments. And so as a parent or a caregiver or an older, influential figure, it is completely okay for a child to see like, oh, this was a really hard situation, or, oh, I'm really tired, or I'm angry, or that made me upset, having conversations about that. And I think even culturally, that's important, because there are certain cultures who experience a lot of different things in this country. And if you have children that you have access to, talk about those things, help them understand how you feel about it. You know, I'm a Black woman. It's completely okay when certain things happen racially in the world for me to talk with my kids. Like, yeah, that makes me sad that people think that way about us or whatever. But just expanding their knowledge and vocabulary about it.
Yeah, being really honest. I think we want to shield kids sometimes and not, put too much on them or feel like, we are overloading them with this emotion. But kids pick up on how you're feeling. And so even if you're saying, oh, I'm fine, it was a good day, and they can sense that you're not okay, they understand that. Kids can sense the vibe, they can sense the energy, and they might not say anything because they don't know how to respond to that because developmentally they're not there.
Right.
But they can understand, okay, what this person is saying and what they're doing or their actions are completely different, and I'm confused by that. And sometimes they can start to attribute that to them. It's like, why is this person upset? Or they're saying they're okay, but it doesn't look like they're okay. What's going on? And so a lot of confusion. And I think on the other side of your point is if, parents are being really honest with kids are going to be honest with you.
Yep.
So if they had a really hard day or someone stole their crayons or whatever, that seems like a really trivial issue to parents sometimes. It's like, oh, it's fine. We'll get you some new crayons. It'll be fine tomorrow. Like, you won't remember it. But for them in that moment, you're teaching them to be okay with whatever experience they had. Yeah. And so I would say if you're a caregiver, be really intentional about if your kid is coming to you with experiences that feel like they're not that big to you. It is big to them. Right. And I want you to talk with them about that. Say, oh, yes, it sounds like that made you really angry. Let's problem solve together. What can we do about that? Let's regulate our emotions first and then think about what's the best course of action moving forward. And I think when kids are involved in that process, it makes them feel really proud that they can handle their emotions and that the emotion does not stop them from still being productive. I think kids get frustrated when they have these big feelings and they don't know an outlet for them or they're not sure what a good solution would look like. So I think really on the other side of that, making sure that you're talking to your kids in a way that validates their emotions, but then also helps them problem solve, because they're not going to naturally say, oh, this kid broke my crayons, we can just get some new ones, or, we can talk to the kid's parents. They're just distraught because they don't know what to do. Yeah. They're coming to you because you're the parent and you can help them problem solve, but they can also have agency and they can also have a say in what to do next.
Absolutely. As Charice was talking, another brilliant podcast episode came to mind, so I'll tell you about that in a second. But I love that because kids need that honesty. They need that transparency so they can model that and kind of give that back to you. And I like when Charice was talking about kids picking up on the vibes. And if I'm saying this, but I'm doing something else, how confusing that can be. One of my sons, he is so observant. And even if I could tell you that I'm fine, my body language and face would give it away. And so I'll notice him sometimes if I'm like stressed or dealing with something, he'll watch my face. And I've had to learn to be really honest with him because my face is going to let you know that I'm stressed, frustrated, whatever the case may be. And so he'll look at me and he'll say, oh, we're frustrated. Or, oh, and it's funny because I hate traffic. And so one of my sons will be like, Mommy, we're frustrated because it's a lot of traffic, isn't it? And I'm like, yes. And I'm honest about that because they're already reading it on my face. And if I tell them like, oh, no, I'm fine, then now they're confused because I'm trying to understand emotional experiences. Your face is all scrunched up, but you're telling me you're fine. What's going on? So just being honest about that helps them match the right emotion to the right experience. And then they can do that for you because if their face is scrunched up and I ask them like, hey, what's wrong? They can reflect back on Mom and be like, well, Mom, I think I'm frustrated because so-and-so did this or that. Right. And so, this weekend, one of my sons, the oldest brother said something to the youngest brother, and Eason was like, I just didn't like how Roman talked to me. I was like, you know what? That is valid, honey. Let's go tell him that. But if we didn't have moments where we talked about stuff like that, it wouldn't happen. So please be honest. And if not, Charice is an amazing child therapist. If you need other tips for that, right, reach out to a professional. They can help you with that. And I think we should maybe do an extended episode on parenting practices or caregiving practices because this is really rich information, I think.
I think that'll be great. And as you were talking, I was thinking about the other component is the kid is going to feel safe if you are telling them, I feel this way and this is how I look, or, it matches, like you said, the emotion into my body language or to what I'm doing. Yes, it's frustrating, but frustration doesn't mean that it's a negative thing. Absolutely. Or I'm going to feel out of control. I can get through this moment. We're going to get through traffic. We're going to get home, and we survived the frustration, but we acknowledged it and it was okay. And so kids learn that there's a safe environment for feelings here, because sometimes even when you say, oh no, everything's fine, they feel like they have to also do that. And so when they're frustrated, it's like, well, no, I'm fine. I should be fine. And then they freak out because the frustration is so much bigger than what they can comprehend, right? They don't have the words for it, and they also don't know what to do because we're not modeling that. And so I think being really intentional about how you show emotions and explain it to your kids is very important.
Absolutely.
But that was our last question for this episode. Do you have any other thoughts or any other things you want the listeners to know?
No, I loved this episode. I hope that you guys enjoyed, one, saying what the top Googled mental health questions were, but also our responses to it. I think, as always, you can DM us, you can write us and ask us about things. Charice is going to tell you about our amazing subscription feature, but I loved this episode. I think it was really helpful.
We have a new subscription episode coming out really soon, so you want to make sure that you subscribe to it. As we said before, on this episode, we went into panic, and we actually have another episode where it has different types of anxiety, where panic was one of the disorders, and we went more in depth. And so if you liked the information that we gave today, make sure you subscribe so you can get the full episode. And those episodes are almost 60 minutes or longer. And so make sure you subscribe. If you have any questions, any thoughts, please reach out. But thank you for listening. Bye.